How's everyone doing tonight? Good? Good. I want to thank you for spending an hour of your evening with us tonight. My name is Chris Drapeau. I'm a Ball State University doctoral student. I'm also the co-founder and co-chair of the East Central Indiana Suicide Prevention Coalition. And before I introduce Ms. Heidi Bryant, I'd just like to make a few announcements first. First, I'd like to thank all of the sponsors of tonight's event: the Delaware County chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or otherwise known as NAMI, the Ball State University Counseling Center, Ball State University Office of Health, Alcohol, and Drug Education, the Departments of Communication Studies, Counseling Psychology, Educational Psychology, and Psychological Science, the Ball State chapter of the Alive campaign, the Ball State Student Nurse Association, the Betterow chapter of Sigma Theta Tau Nursing Honor Society, I hope I didn't mess that up, and the East Central Indiana Suicide Prevention Coalition. Next, it's possible that the content of tonight's presentation may bring up some negative feelings for you. So if for any reason this happens, I want you to know that we have trained counselors here who can help you if you need to talk, and they'll be located here in the front row. Also, if you have to step out during the presentation at any time, we would like to check up with you just to make sure that you're okay. Now, you probably noticed this quotation behind me as you took your seat. I doubt that when writing or speaking these words that Dale Carnegie was thinking of people at risk for suicide, but I think it can be readily applied to anyone who is having these thoughts. Some may feel that those who are thinking of suicide, who attempt suicide, or even die by suicide, some people may feel that these individuals are weak, or maybe the world will be better off without them. And I just want to state right now that this is a lie. And what I hope that you will understand after you leave this presentation tonight is that suicide is a very complex phenomenon that can affect any of us directly or indirectly at any point in our lives. And that those with thoughts of suicide, those who attempt suicide and survive, they can go on and live what we would consider normal, healthy lives. However, the stigma that surrounds suicide often blinds us from this realization. And so tonight is an effort to attack that stigma. And I urge you to pay attention to Ms. Bryan's comments, because what you learn tonight can potentially save a life. So please give her your undivided attention. And I also invite you to join Ms. Bryan, myself, and the thousands of individuals around this world who are fighting to prevent suicide and attacking stigma and doing their best to help those who feel like there's no hope at all. And I also want to share some statistics with you. According to the most recent mortality data available, which is from the year 2010, suicide is estimated to occur once every 14 minutes in the United States, and about once every 10 hours in Indiana. Even more alarming is that the number of suicides more than double the number of homicides. And this is something that has gone on for several years. For instance, in the United States, 136% more people died by suicide than were murdered. In Indiana, this percentage was 179%. And as you can see on this slide here, suicides typically rise in the spring months. They reach their peak in the summer. I want you to keep in mind that from the winter to spring, you notice that increase in the numbers. And so we're at a critical point right now in the year where there may be people around us who are at risk. So please pay attention to those around you, because you never know if those you love and care about are thinking. And don't be afraid to ask them if you are suspicious. Okay, I forwarded that slide too quickly. So ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that learning about suicide is important because those thinking about taking their life, they are worth the effort to save. Their lives, they matter. Those thinking about suicide are often unsure about attempting, but they feel like sometimes they have no other option. If these important individuals keep on trying, they have the potential to live a life that can inspire others to keep on trying when they feel like they have no hope as well. And at the same time, save their family, friends, and community members the pain of having to deal with the loss if they died by suicide. So the decision to live is important. And most of the important things in this world have been accomplished by people who have kept on trying when there seemed to be no hope at all. You don't have to be an expert to prevent suicide. You just have to care about making a difference and educate yourself on what to look for and what to do. We still may lose people to suicide, but we will save lives if we stand up together and let those at risk know that they matter and that we care about them. As Ms. Bryan shares her story, I invite you again to please give her your undivided attention, because again, what you learned tonight can save someone's life. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Heidi Bryan. Having struggled with depression and suicide, Ms. Bryan became involved in suicide prevention after losing her brother to suicide. In 1999, she founded the Feeling Blue Suicide Prevention Council, now known as the Pennsylvania Older Adult Suicide Prevention Coalition. She has served on the board of directors for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and as the vice chairman of the board of directors for the Suicide Prevention Action Network. Ms. Bryan was also the recipient of the Suicide Prevention Action Network's Sandy Martin Grassroots Award in 2005. She developed the booklet, After an Attempt, The Emotional Impact of a Suicide Attempt on Families, which was distributed to every hospital in Pennsylvania, and she also co-authored Now What Do I Do?, a guide for suicide attempt survivors. She currently serves on the Suicide Attempt Survivor Task Force of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention and also on the Prevent Suicide Wisconsin Steering Committee. A QPR Suicide Prevention Master Trainer, Ms. Bryan is also a facilitator for suicide bereavement support groups and the author of the book, Must Be the Witches in the Mountains, which is on grief after suicide. She received her bachelor's degree in chemistry from Cedar Crest College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mrs. Heidi Bryan to Ball State University. Heidi.
Almost forgot to turn this on. That would have been good. Thank you, Chris, for that great introduction, and thank you all for bringing me here. And I'm glad to see so many people here. I was thinking, when I was your age, would I have come to this? And then I realized, yes, if it meant not studying or doing homework, I sure would have. So, but thanks for being here. It's always like, where do you start? And I always am tempted to say, long ago and far away. I was born and raised in your typical, average, everyday, totally dysfunctional, angry household. I think the easiest way for me to describe it in a nutshell is to say, pick an abuse and I'll match the family member or members to it. It was not fun. I remember when I was first with my husband, I said to him one day, I don't think I had such a good childhood. And he looked at me and he said, that has got to be the biggest understatement I have ever heard. So I thought, well, I guess that's kind of validating. So on top of it, I had a brother who died before I was born. He died 2 weeks after my other brother, Greg, was born. And I didn't know him, so I thought, well, he doesn't, it's not that big of a deal, but it really was a huge deal. I was told all my life that I looked just like him, that I acted like him, and soon I started to really relate to him. At first, I thought of him as my guardian angel, and I used to pray to him and hope that he would, help me out. Then that kind of graduated to, I wish it had been me who died instead of Chucky. His name was Chucky. And then it was, it should have been me who died. I was a mistake, and that if he hadn't died, I never would have been born because they wouldn't have needed two of us. And I just felt like I was just this giant cosmic mistake. It was a mistake. It shouldn't have been me. It should have been him who lived. So from a very early age, I was not in love with living. I wanted to leave. I wanted to escape, and I wasn't thrilled with life. And we lived in the country. There was nowhere for me to run to or escape to. I, I had no choice. The only thing that I could think about really was heaven, and heaven sounded pretty good. So, I mean, from a very early age, I just remember wanting to die. I do think, though, that, but I also had some things in my life that were good, that helped. And one of them was the fact that I was born and raised in the country. My father and my brother Jeff, Chucky was the one who died, then Greg was born. A year after Greg, Jeff was born, and then 4 years later, I was born. I was the only girl, the youngest and only girl. But my brother Jeff and my father were, they would just take me along on walks. My father hunted. He had to train the hunting dogs. He'd always take me along. And we spent a lot of time just sitting there, not saying anything, just waiting for the dog to bring the rabbit around. But it really made me more attuned to nature. And my brother Jeff just, he was always teaching me about the different animals, the different everything. And he had a great imagination too. And he would, there was one area in the woods that we had that, the leprechaun lived at St. Patrick's Day. And he would talk about, he had a little Irish accent and stuff. So Jeff just also really helped me to get involved in nature. And I really think that my first connection with any kind of like a higher power or God or whatever you want to call him, was in the woods, lying down and feeling the sun shine on me. So and school was school. It had its good points. It got me away from home, but it could be tough too. My mother was one of the last of the German war brides to come over, so I was made fun of. Heil Hitler and things like that. And I struggled. And in my 7th grade, that's when my brother started to molest me, and that's when my grades dropped. I gained a lot of weight. I started to eat compulsively, and I was miserable. And my school put me down a section. We had sections, and I was always on the top section. They moved me down. And so I didn't know any of those. We hadn't bonded. I didn't know them. I didn't fit in. So 8th grade was horrible. They teased me about being fat. I didn't fit in with them. They let me know I didn't fit in with them. And it was very difficult. And that's when I think I first really started to think about killing myself. My mother would periodically clean out the medicine cabinet, and she would have the half-empty bottles that were to be thrown out. She would put them by the sink, and then whoever was going to the trash would take them to the trash. Well, I would always volunteer to take them to the trash, but they never made it to the trash. I started hoarding pills, from that point on. And I did this my entire life, and nobody ever knew I did it. I hid them, and like I said, roommates, my husband never knew. No one ever knew that I did that. And 2 years ago, we moved from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin, and in cleaning out the house, it was kind of amazing. I kept finding these bottles of pills everywhere, in like some of the most bizarre places. And I was like, what was I thinking? Because there's no way in hell I would have remembered where all of them were if I ever was going to do it, I was like, what was I thinking? And of course, my first, it's funny, after all these years, my first response when I'd see one was, ooh, this is a good one. But I threw them away. But just some habits just die hard, I guess. But so I started hoarding. I kind of tried to scratch my wrist we had this stucco wall, and that was very ineffective, and I realized this wasn't going to work. So, I just survived. And then being the obsessive compulsive person that I am, I had gained weight, so I was trying to lose weight because I was made fun of so much. And of course, I went overboard with that, and then in no time, I was anorexic. Only back then, because I'm old, I don't think Karen they didn't know about Karen Carpenter yet. That hadn't happened. So nobody really knew about anorexia. And I remember going back to school freshman year, and there was another classmate of mine who was very anorexic. And I said something to my girlfriend about her, and my girlfriend turned to me and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're going to look like her in no time." And I just was like, okay. You know, it just kind of startled me, but it stuck. And then I did something which I do not recommend. I do not advocate this. Please know that I mean that. But I then started to drink. I was invited, do I want to go out drinking? And I went out drinking. And it's funny how the anorexia just dissolved. And in no time, I was drinking. I mean, and I think I was an alcoholic from the get-go. But I also believe that if I hadn't started drinking in high school, I would have killed myself. I do think that initially drinking saved my life. And that's why I don't recommend it. It's certainly not a coping mechanism. Please don't do it. But for me, initially, it saved my life. I mean, later on down the road, the poison and the antidote were the same, and I had to deal with that. But in the beginning, it relieved the pain. And I could live with myself. I had that brief moment where I could tolerate myself. Sometimes I try to think of what's the best way I can describe what it was like. I mean, I felt like I was too sensitive. My mother especially always said I was too sensitive. I felt like I wasn't meant for this world, like my nerve endings were on the outside of my skin instead of the other way around, and that this world was just too hard for someone like me. And then on top of it, I shouldn't be here anyway. But then, you know, sometimes I'm sure all of you have done this. Well, maybe not. But anyway, sometimes you say something like in class, and then afterwards you say, "Oh, why did I say that? That was so stupid. I sounded like an idiot. I should have just kept my mouth shut," you know? Well, I would do that, but I wouldn't. But most of you, I'm sure, can then let it go and pass, you know, and it's gone. You know, you just have that for a brief period of time. But not me. I would just like ruminate and just, "What, you idiot," you know, and just start to berate myself. And it wasn't just one thought every once in a while. It was like every thought, every action I did, everything about me. I just would, "Oh, you idiot, you know," and it was just this choir of critics that was constantly singing in my head. And it was 24/7. And, you know, if that's not pain, I don't know what is. But that was what my life was like. That was what it was like living inside of me every day, all the time. It was hell. And I wanted relief. So one day, I had that proverbial to be or not to be question, and I went for a walk in our woods. And then I went through the woods and up the field. We lived in the Poconos, so there were mountains. And I went up the little hill, and I turned around, and it was fall. And I was seriously thinking, am I going to do it or not? And I turned and I looked and I saw these mountains in the distance, and they had the bright, brilliant fall colors, and I thought, "Oh, wow, that's really pretty." And I kept walking for a while, and then I stopped in my tracks, and I thought, "That's really pretty." And then I had my answer. I thought, well, as long as I can see beauty in this world, I'll keep going. But the minute I no longer see any beauty at all in this world, I'll know it's time to check out. Because you see, I was not going to make an attempt. It was never going to be an attempt. My mother had been hospitalized at one point, and the woman next to her was actually a high school student who woke up from a suicide attempt. And my mother always talked about how horrible it was to witness her waking up from her attempt. How she cried, how she didn't want to be alive, and how awful it was, and that no one should have to witness that. And I believe that just left a lasting impression in both my mind and my brother Jeff's mind, that we were not going to ever wake up from an attempt. We weren't. So I thought, okay, I'll keep going. And I did. And I mean, and it was hard at times, and there were awful things that happened at home, but there were also bright spots. And I liked high school for the most part, and I realized that if I wanted to get away from that family, I had to do well in school and go to college, and that's what I did. So I went away to college, and I thought, well, now I'll be okay. Does this work? No. Okay. I thought, okay, that's good, and plus at college, my God, I could drink, and no one was, I didn't have to come home and fake it or try and act sober. I could drink whenever I wanted to. I was in heaven, And so I just thought, great, college. But I was still, I was still struggling. I was still having problems. And then I heard, and I think this was my sophomore year, the beginning of my sophomore year, I heard that there was college counseling available to the students, free of charge. And the one good thing about having no self-esteem is that you're messed up. I knew there was something wrong with me. And I wasn't afraid to admit that. I knew I needed help. I knew I needed help. I knew I really needed help. So when I heard there was college counseling available, I was there. And I went there every week. I went there whenever I could. And his name was Roger, and he was a godsend to me. He really was. He helped me through. I remember having a big fight with my parents. My parents wanted me to come home, and it was going to be a big confrontation. And I called Roger, and I said, I just wanted, if there was a cliff I could drive over, I would do that rather than go home right now. And he, said, let's come on over, let's do role play, and he helped me through things like that. He was great. But then something really weird happened.